Good evening. 10 disturbing encounters from the Appalachian wilderness. Stories from hikers, workers, and travelers who saw something they can't explain. If you're new here, drop your location in the comments. Let's begin. I drive nights because the dark keeps me honest. No tourists drifting lanes, no way station chatter, just the hum of tires and the Appalachian ridges breathing in and out around me. That run from Wise, Virginia to Knoxville should have been routine. I'd made it 100 times. Around midnight, the fog rolled in, thick enough that my high beams just lit up a wall of white. The air through the cracked window smelled like cold creek water and diesel. The GPS on my dash blinked out for a second, then came back with that useless phrase, acquiring satellites. Somewhere past Pound Gap, I caught sight of a mile marker, 241. Bent a little, one bolt missing, paint flaking around the edges. Nothing strange about it, but it stuck in my mind the way small details do when you're overtired. 10 minutes later, I saw it again. Same crack, same tilt. Same tuft of broom sage at the base. I slowed, thinking maybe there was another 241 on the opposite shoulder, but no, both sides matched. The next green exit sign still showed the same numbers. Fog thickened until the trees disappeared completely. The highway felt suspended in nothing. I told myself the Department of Transportation must have doubled a sign by mistake. Happens all the time. Then I passed 241 a third time. My skin went cold. The odometer showed 6 fresh miles. I keyed the CB out of habit. Westbound, anyone seeing duplicate markers past 240? Only static. When the fourth one appeared, I hit the hazards and eased onto a gravel turnout. The fog swallowed the beam from my flashlight in about 10 feet. Standing there alone, the only sound was my own engine ticking as it cooled. Up close, the sign looked ordinary, thin sheet metal bolted to a post, a line of rust bleeding down one corner. I pressed my palm to it. It felt damp, like something breathing through condensation. I drew a quick black X with a Sharpie near the bottom edge, just to prove I'd really been there. Back in the cab, I reset the trip counter and set cruise at 55. I counted mile by mile. 2.1, 2.8, 3 flat. Fog peeled open ahead, and there it was again, mile 241. My black X right where I'd left it. I gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles popped. Nope, I said out loud, because silence felt dangerous. I kept driving anyway. What else do you do? Quit and wait for dawn? I watched the clock, 2:17 a.m., and told myself I'd make it to the next exit, even if the signs wanted to play tricks. 5 minutes later, another green reflector gleamed through the haze. Relief hit me like caffeine. Then the fog broke, and my heart stuttered. It wasn't an exit sign. It was another 241, leaning in the exact same angle, the same little patch of weeds curling around its base. My empty coffee cup, one I'd tossed into the passenger side trash pocket hours ago, was suddenly sitting back in the cup holder, steaming. The smell was fresh, bitter, too real. I almost dropped it, and that's when I saw the clock again. 2:17 a.m. The second hand wasn't moving. The road ahead curved right and vanished into milk. Behind me, my tire tracks disappeared before I could finish blinking, like the asphalt had swallowed them. I eased my foot onto the brake and whispered the first prayer I'd said in 20 years. Somewhere in that white silence, the CB crackled once. A hiss. A half word, something that might have been my own voice repeating what I'd just said. Okay. I must have sat there, with my hand on the shifter for a full minute, watching the fog crawl over my hood. I wanted to radio dispatch, but what would I even say? Hey, boss, the road's looping like a broken record. I'd lose my route, maybe my license. So I did what any stubborn driver does. I tried to outrun the crazy. I dropped it into drive and eased forward, tires whispering on wet asphalt. The world shrank to the pale tunnel of my headlights. Every mile marker that should have been next, 242, 243, never showed. just black trees dissolving in fog. I turned up the radio for company, but it refused to catch a signal. Just static, thin and brittle, like the sound of wind over a microphone. Then, buried in the noise, I heard something faint, a voice whispering my name. I cut the radio off and drove in silence. My chest felt tight, the kind of tight you get before a storm when the pressure drops and your ears ring. The CB crackled once, a short burst like someone breathing too close to the mic. I reached for it, froze, then pulled my hand back. Not worth hearing what might answer. A glow appeared ahead, headlights, twin beams, faint through the fog, parked halfway off the shoulder. Relief hit me like caffeine. Another driver. I tapped the horn, a short double blast, but the other rig didn't move. As I drew closer, I noticed something wrong. The truck's lights sat too low, like it had sunk into the ground, and there was no reflection of my beams in the mirrors. The glass looked dark, absorbing light instead of catching it. I slowed to a crawl, my window half down. The smell hit first. Burnt rubber, old oil, wet metal. Then I saw the side lettering. Miller Freight Lines. My company. I rolled forward until my high beams washed across the door. The paint was faded, the numbers nearly erased, but I could still read them. Unit 678. My truck number. I killed the lights instantly. My breath fogged the windshield as my brain scrambled to make sense of it. Maybe it was a scrapyard spill. Maybe someone had hauled a wreck up here. But the hood was crumpled just like mine, the same dent near the driver's side step. Something sat inside the cab, a shape behind the windshield still as stone. The angle of its shoulders, broad, slouched, was too familiar. I stepped out before I could think better of it. The air felt thick, sticky, humming with some low frequency that made my teeth ache. My flashlight barely cut the fog. When I swept it toward the wreck, the beam hit the figure inside. A man, or what was left of one. The skin looked pale, bloated, and the face, God, it had my jawline, my cap, even the same safety vest with the reflective strip torn at the shoulder. My own reflection blinked. Slowly, I stumbled backward, slipping on wet gravel. The CB inside my cab roared to life, my own voice coming through, too loud, too close. You're late again. I froze. The headlights of the wreck flared bright for a split second, blinding white, then cut out completely. When my vision cleared, the space where the wreck had been was empty. No tracks, no metal, just the dark silhouette of trees and fog swallowing the ditch. I backed up toward my truck, shaking so hard my flashlight stuttered against the ground. When I turned to climb in, the mile marker stood right beside my door, closer than it had ever been. The black X I'd drawn earlier was gone, melted into streaks of red, like fresh paint, still dripping. The number above it had changed too. Not 241 anymore, just one word stamped crooked across the face of the sign in reflective white. Start. I don't remember putting the truck in gear again, but the next thing I knew, I was rolling. My hands gripped the wheel so tight my knuckles cracked. The speedometer hovered at 50, steady as a pulse. The fog swallowed everything except the line of white reflectors flashing under the headlights. I kept thinking, just drive, keep going. The next town has lights, gas stations, people, anything that wasn't this empty mountain. But the road didn't change. Every curve felt like a copy of the last one. The same trees, the same guardrail dent, the same oil stain on the asphalt. I checked the clock, still 2:17 a.m. The second hand hadn't moved. I pulled my phone from the dash mount. It was dead, screen black. I could have sworn it was at 70% when I left the warehouse. I turned the radio dial, desperate for sound. Every channel hissed the same tone, a low, steady hum, almost like a heartbeat. I turned the knob off. The hum didn't stop. It just shifted under the floorboards. Then something moved in the fog ahead. Not an animal. Bigger, lower. I eased off the gas. As my headlights hit it, I realized it wasn't a shape at all, but the ground itself rising and falling in a slow wave, like the asphalt was breathing. My truck rattled, tires slipping. I slammed the brakes, but the pedal went soft. The rig drifted forward as if the road had turned to ice. I yanked the wheel, trying to angle toward the shoulder, and passed mile 241 again. I screamed something wordless and floored it. The world outside blurred. The fog streaked like smeared paint, my vision tunneling until it all went white. I felt weightless, like falling without speed. Then suddenly, road again, dark and perfect. My hands trembled on the wheel. The odometer blinked zeros, every reading reset. For a long time, I didn't move. I just sat there, the engine idling, staring at the empty road. Finally, I decided to test it. I put the rig in reverse. The tires crunched for maybe 50 feet. Then the rearview mirror filled with headlights. My own headlights. I froze. My truck, another truck, was sitting there on the asphalt behind me. Same company name, same unit number. Same me, slumped over the wheel, head turned slightly toward the side window. The headlights dimmed to amber, pulsing faintly. I climbed out before reason could stop me. The fog made the air thick as smoke. When I circled to the driver's side, I saw my own face through the glass, eyes half open, lips moving. No sound came out. I reached for the door handle, and the glass flexed inward, like a lung inhaling. A whisper slid out through the crack, my own voice again. Keep going. The engine of the other truck roared to life. Its headlights flared, blinding me. When I blinked, it was gone. No tire marks, just silence and the faint smell of hot oil. I climbed back into my cab, numb. The GPS lit up on its own, screen glowing pale green. Only one word pulsed on it: route. I pressed navigate, and it displayed a single line ahead, looping in a circle that led right back to my position. The fog outside began to thin. My clock ticked once. 2:18. Finally, it moved. A laugh escaped me. Short, broken, maybe hysterical. I pressed the accelerator because what else was left to do? The truck rolled forward, smooth and quiet. The air cleared just enough to show a new sign up ahead, shining clean and green. Exit 12, Knoxville. 42 miles. I almost cried. I passed it, breathing hard, and kept driving. The highway opened into dawn light. Birds, blue haze. My chest eased. Then I saw it in the mirror. Behind me, standing perfectly upright in the morning sun, was a mile marker, the white numbers flashing back at me through the mist. 241. My CB crackled softly, then a voice, my own, came through again, calm and tired. Westbound. Anyone seeing repeats on this stretch? The static swallowed the rest, and the road kept going. Forever. Locals say Black Hollow Lake doesn't have a bottom, that it just keeps going. Old coal shafts, collapsed caverns, tunnels that lead under half the county. I used to laugh at that kind of talk. I was a diver, not a ghost hunter. The state hired me to do a depth survey that summer, to chart the lake's floor for a possible dam expansion. Easy job, 3 days of sonar mapping, a few dives, a paycheck that'd cover rent for months. Day 1 was normal. The water was dark, clean, still. My sonar rig traced the usual contours: ledge, slope, silt shelf. Then, about 50 feet down, the readings went strange. The signal didn't bounce back. It just vanished, as if the beam had been swallowed. Could be a sinkhole, my assistant Rhea said over the radio. We dropped a marker buoy over the spot and logged the coordinates. That night, camped on the shore, I replayed the sonar data. The gap wasn't random. It formed a perfect circle. Maybe a vent, Rhea said, sipping instant coffee. Vents don't eat sound. She laughed, but it didn't reach her eyes. The next morning, I went down with full gear: camera, Lights, tether line. The first 30 feet were fine. Fish scattered, plants waved lazy in the currents. Then the world dimmed faster than it should have. My light beams just stopped 5 feet out like they'd hit smoke underwater. The circle appeared in front of me, faintly outlined by disturbed silt. A pit, 10 feet across, perfectly smooth. The edges curved inward, not carved, not natural, built. "Rhea, I'm at the anomaly," I said. "Depth 62. Copy that," her voice crackled back. "How's visibility?" "Poor. It looks like... Wait." Something reflected light from inside the hole. I angled the beam. For half a second I saw a structure, a straight edge, corner, hinge. A door, not a hatch, not a rock face, a proper door. Rectangular, iron, sealed tight. "Rhea, there's metal down here, looks like a door set into the floor." Silence, then static, then faintly, "Pull up." "I can check." "Nick, pull up now." The comm died. I was already leaning closer, my gloved hand brushing the edge of the frame. The metal felt warm through the neoprene, almost like a pulse under my palm. I pulled back quick, heart hammering. The lake was freezing. Nothing down here should have been warm. A low vibration rolled through the water, not sound, but pressure. It rattled my teeth. The silt on the lake floor lifted, swirling into spirals around the circle. "Rhea." I'm feeling static. My depth gauge flickered, 62 feet, then 70, then 80, without me moving. The tether line went slack. Then something knocked from the other side of the door. 3 hard raps, solid metal echoing through the water. I kicked back, ready to ascend, but the water thickened, felt like syrup around my limbs. The knocking came again, slower now, followed by a faint scrape, like metal dragging open. The silt rose until everything turned black. My light blinked once, twice, and went out completely. For a second, I felt weightless. Then I saw a dim glow below me, cold blue, pulsing through the murk. It came from under the door. I rose fast, hand over hand on the tether, lungs burning. When I broke the surface, I tore my mask off and gasped, coughing lake water. Rhea was on the dock, pale as chalk. "You heard it, didn't you?" she said. I nodded. She stared past me, toward the marker buoy. "Then you need to know something. That spot you were diving? What about it? That's where they flooded the mine entrance in '58. The men they didn't find are still down there. I should have left the lake that night. Packed up, driven off, taken the loss. But something about the knocking wouldn't leave my head. You don't get that kind of precision underwater by accident. 3 clean strikes, measured, deliberate, human. Rhea didn't talk much after that. She sat by the campfire, staring across the water. "It wasn't supposed to still be there," she said once. "The company filled the shaft with concrete. My granddad worked that site." I tried to tell her the door couldn't be part of the old mine, not at that depth, not with those clean edges. But the more I talked, the more she withdrew. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of water slapping against the dock in slow, rhythmic waves. No wind. The surface of the lake was rising and falling in pulses, as if something large moved beneath it. The buoy we'd dropped was gone. Rhea's tent was empty. I grabbed my flashlight and ran to the shore. Her gear was stacked neatly by the edge. Mask, fins, tank, but no sign of her. The water was perfectly still again, black as glass. Her voice crackled through the comm on my belt. "Nick." I froze. "Rhea, where are you?" Static hissed for a moment before she spoke again. I saw it open. I turned toward the lake. "You went down there?" The radio popped. "It's not under us anymore." "What?" Then came a new sound through the speaker, a hollow metallic groan, long and low, like a door hinge turning underwater. It echoed through the trees, vibrating the dock under my boots. The lake began to glow. Faint at first, a dull blue shimmer spreading outward from the center. The surface rippled in concentric circles, each one lighting for a second, before fading. The glow pulsed 3 times, then stopped. Something enormous exhaled from the water, sending a cold mist across the shore. The air smelled like iron and old oil. I took a step back. "Rhea?" No answer. I tried the spotlight scanning across the lake. For half a second, I saw her standing on the far bank. She was barefoot, soaked, staring into the water like she was waiting for instructions. "Stay there!" I shouted. She didn't move. Then she raised her hand and pointed at the lake. The surface broke. A slab of metal, black, smooth, glistening, rose up through the water. It wasn't the door I'd seen before. It was bigger, rectangular, like part of a wall. Water cascaded off its sides in sheets. Beneath the surface, more shapes shifted, faint lights glinting. My knees went weak. It wasn't a mine shaft. It was a structure. The slab tilted toward me, slow as sunrise, until it faced the shore. The light inside it brightened, then dimmed, like a heartbeat syncing with mine. "Rhea!" I yelled again. She turned. Her face looked wrong, gray, too smooth, as if the water had replaced skin. Her mouth opened, but when she spoke, the voice came through my headset instead of the air. "It's still working." The slab settled with a deep thud that rattled my bones. The glow beneath the lake pulsed again, once, twice, and I realized it was reflecting on the trees behind me, painting the entire valley in blue light. I turned to run, but the ground under my boots was softening, turning slick. My flashlight fell and rolled toward the water, beam flashing across footprints, bare, wet, leading from the shore into the woods. Rhea's voice filled my ears, calm and mechanical now. "Doorway open, depth inverted, come see." The radio cut. The last thing I remember before everything went dark was the lake's surface rippling upward instead of down, like something huge was breathing from the other side. When I came to, it was daylight. The fog was so thick it looked solid, hanging waist-high over the lake. My gear was gone, my tent collapsed. Only the dock remained, and the water wasn't still anymore. It moved in slow spirals, draining toward the center, the way bathwater swirls when the plug's been pulled. I called for Rhea until my voice broke. No echo. No birds, no sound, but the steady drag of water circling the hollow. The slab I'd seen the night before was gone, but the glow remained, dim now, pulsing from below like a lantern under ice. It came in threes, one long, two short. My body moved before my mind caught up. I grabbed a rope from the truck, tied it to the dock cleat, clipped it to my harness. Then I stepped in. The water was warmer than air, thick as smoke. Every breath through the regulator tasted metallic. I descended slow, eyes on the faint light below. 30 feet, 40, 50. Then the lake bed appeared, smooth, rippling faintly like skin over muscle. My old marker buoy rested nearby, bobbing in a current that didn't exist. The light came from a slit in the ground. Not the round pit I'd seen before. This was a doorway, rectangular, open, framed by iron rivets that curved outward like ribs. Something waited beyond it. I hovered near the threshold, light trembling in my hand. Inside was not water, not really. It looked thicker, denser, a second depth folding into itself. My beam disappeared the moment it crossed the line. Then Rhea's voice crackled through the comm again, clear this time. "Nick, you're late." I spun. Nothing but bubbles and black water. "Where are you?" "Inside. Come on. It's beautiful." Her voice echoed wrong, like it came from the back of my skull instead of the headset. I edged closer to the doorway. The light inside pulsed brighter, and for a moment the water cleared. I saw the mine. Rusty carts, rails, helmets half buried in silt, and at the far end, a tunnel sloping down, vanishing into the blue glow. Shadows moved along the walls, men in slickers, tools slung over shoulders, walking slowly in a loop. Then one turned. His face was blank, features smoothed away by water and time. He raised his hand, palm outward, fingers splayed. Behind him, the door began closing. "No!" I kicked forward, grabbing the edge of the frame, but the current slammed me backward. My tether line snapped taut, wrenching my shoulder. The lake roared, bubbles screaming around me. The door shut with a sound that wasn't metal at all. It was breath. The light went out. For a second, everything was black. Then the glow returned, weaker now, and I realized it was coming from me. Thin threads of blue light ran under my skin, pulsing faintly. My gauge spun to 0. The rope jerked once, twice, then went limp. I started kicking upward, but the water had no surface anymore. Just dark, just pressure. Then a shape passed above me, familiar, angular, a dock. The same dock I'd left from, suspended upside down. My own boot prints trailed across its boards in reverse. The water thinned, and I broke through, not into air, but into something quieter, heavier. The world above the surface looked exactly the same, except the sky had no color, just blank light. On the shore stood Rhea, dripping wet, face smooth and featureless like the miners. She held out her hand. "Depth inverted," she said. "We're below now. You can rest." I looked back toward the lake. The door glowed faintly beneath the surface, pulsing 3 times, then still. When I finally walked onto the bank beside her, the air smelled of coal and rain. A sign half buried in the mud read, "Black Hollow Mine, 1958. The letters were reversed, like I was reading them from the wrong side of glass. And when I looked down, the reflection staring back at me didn't have a face anymore either. Most people think the silence up here would drive you crazy. They're half right. My name's Aaron Pike, seasonal fire lookout for the Forestry Service. Just me, a 40-foot tower, and a square mile of Appalachian forest stretching every direction. The job is simple: watch for smoke, log weather, report by radio. Easy money, long hours, and a view that makes you forget the rest of the world even exists. This was my 3rd season, and by now I knew every ridge and stream by heart. The tower creaked when the wind came off the valley. The floor hummed under my boots, and the smell of hot pine boards stuck to my clothes. It was the kind of isolation you start craving once you've had it. The first odd thing came at dawn. I always start the day by logging sound, woodpeckers, rain, wind direction. That morning, there wasn't a single bird. Not even the little brown thrush that nested under the stairs. The forest looked normal, but the quiet was surgical, like the world had been muted. I tapped the mic on the desk radio. "Base, Tower 7. Morning report, weather clear, visibility 20 miles. Static. Then a thin delay before the response. "Copy that, Tower 7? Except the voice wasn't Base. It was mine. It said the exact same words I'd just spoken, tone for tone, then cut to silence. I leaned back, staring at the radio like it had coughed. "Base, confirm," I said again. Nothing. Just faint hiss. The little red light on the set flickered once and died. I told myself it was feedback. That's what I wrote in the logbook anyway. The rest of the morning passed quiet. Too quiet. You don't realize how much noise trees make until they stop. No leaves whispering. No branches popping. Around noon, I climbed down to check the generator shed. Everything looked fine, but the forest smelled wrong. Too clean, like the air after a thunderstorm, but without the storm. On the way back up the tower steps, I noticed something I'd never seen before. The horizon looked closer. Mountains that used to sit blue and hazy 20 miles away now pressed sharp against the sky, edges crisp as if someone had drawn them in thicker pencil. The ridgeline didn't match the map taped to my wall. By late afternoon, my ears hurt. It wasn't from noise, it was from the absence of it. Pressure built behind my jaw until every heartbeat thudded like a hammer. I switched on the tower fan just to hear something mechanical. That's when the missing sounds started returning, but not in the right places. A crow cawed, but the noise came from under the floor. Leaves rustled inside the tower walls. When I looked down through the trapdoor grate, the space below was pitch black, even though sunlight still flooded the cab. I shut the hatch, locked it, and tried to shake it off. Exhaustion messes with your senses. At sunset, I called in again. The radio clicked, sputtered, then cleared. "Tower 7, this is base," a voice said, but the static under it wasn't random. It was breathing. Slow, steady, time to mine. "Base," I said. "You hearing me?" "Copy that," the voice said again. Then it added something the real dispatch never says. "Stay in your tower." I stared at the mic. "Say again?" No reply. Outside, the treetops were swaying, though there wasn't wind enough to move a flag. The sun slid behind the ridge, and the forest fell still again. When full dark came, I heard tapping on the metal stairwell below, 5 steps at a time, pause, then 5 more. The tower door latch trembled once, like something testing it from the other side, and then a voice rose from below, calm and identical to mine, saying quietly, "Tower 7, this is base. Do you read me?" I didn't answer the voice. Every instinct said, "Don't." It sounded too calm, too steady, like whoever, or whatever it was, didn't need to breathe between words. I waited until the echo faded, then switched off the radio entirely. The little red light blinked twice before dying, like it didn't want to. For a long time, nothing happened. I sat in the dark cab, flashlight on my knees, listening to the tower hum in the wind. Eventually, I convinced myself it had to be interference. Radio bleed. Maybe another lookout messing with me from a different channel. I fell asleep in the chair near midnight. When I woke, gray dawn had turned the horizon to paper, and the forest below looked washed clean. The clock on the wall read 6:02. My wristwatch said 3:14. I climbed down to stretch my legs. The steps felt off, too many of them. I always count out of habit, 40 up, 40 down. This time, it took 53 before my boots hit dirt. The forest didn't sound dead anymore, but it didn't sound alive either. The noise was wrong, hollow, birdsong too slow, like a record dragging its speed. I walked to the generator shed. The air inside was stale and damp. When I flipped the switch, the bulb overhead buzzed once, casting a weak orange light that barely touched the corners. A shape leaned in the back, something that looked like my spare fuel canister. I stepped closer. It wasn't a canister. It was another radio, older than mine, thick with dust. Its casing was stamped, "Property of Forestry Service, Tower 7. I knelt beside it and wiped the grime off the frequency dial. It matched mine exactly, channel, tone, everything. When I touched the mic, the speaker crackled to life. "Tower 7, said the voice, my own voice. "This is base. Do you read?" The world tilted for a second. I dropped the mic, stumbled back outside into air that smelled like ozone and pine. The tower loomed above me, thin and skeletal against the clouds. But something about it was off. The windows at the top reflected red, not gold, like there was a fire inside, even though the sun hadn't cleared the ridge. Then I realized I could see myself up there, just a silhouette moving around the cab. Slow, deliberate. My stomach flipped. The door up top creaked open, and the shape leaned out slightly, watching me. I couldn't make out a face, just the glint of glass, my own binoculars. "Hey!" I shouted up. "Who's there?" No answer. I took a step toward the stairs, then stopped. A second tower stood maybe 100 yards beyond the first, identical, same height, same structure. I blinked, and it was gone. Blinked again, and it was back. The horizon rippled, trees shifting like the reflection on a pond someone had disturbed. The forest floor under my boots trembled faintly, a long, low vibration that seemed to come from everywhere. I could feel it in my teeth. Tower 7, the radio in my pocket whispered. I hadn't realized it was still on. Base reports smoke in your sector. Confirm visual. I looked up. The sky was clean, empty. No smoke, I said. Repeat, no smoke. Negative, the voice replied. You are the source. A heat bloomed against my back. I turned, expecting flames, but the heat was coming from the ground itself, radiating through my boots. I ran for the stairs, climbing fast, counting 1, 2, 3, trying not to look down. The steps kept adding themselves, stretching longer, higher. By the time I reached the cab, I was gasping. The door stood open. Inside, the logbook lay on the desk, open to a blank page. The pen was standing upright, balanced on its tip like something had just written with it. A single sentence crawled across the paper in neat, blocky handwriting. Tower 7 confirms fire below. Source located. I looked through the window. The valley glowed red, not with flame but with moving light, like embers circling up from beneath the soil. Then the radio hissed again, and that calm voice, my voice, said, "Stay in your tower." And outside, I could see why. Because another tower had appeared across the ridge, glowing orange in the dark, and someone inside it was waving back. The other tower shouldn't have been there. The Forestry Service kept every lookout mapped, numbered, cross-checked. I'd studied those maps for years. The ridge across from me was nothing but hardwood and shale, yet the structure stood clear as daylight. Same steel frame, same blinking radio antenna, same glass cabin glowing like a lantern in fog, and inside it I could see me. The figure moved just as I did, slow, deliberate, a half-second behind, as if the mountain itself caused delay. I raised my hand, it raised his. My reflection at a distance, except the light from his tower was brighter, too orange, pulsing like fire behind glass. The radio crackled again. Tower 7, confirm visual on secondary post. I swallowed. Affirmative, seeing another tower. Static. Then my own voice came back faintly, layered over itself like an echo. Correction, you're looking at yourself. The words sank through me. The air smelled of smoke now, dry pine and ozone, and the floor beneath my boots felt warmer by the minute. Outside, the treetops shimmered as if heat waves ran through the forest canopy. I tried the base channel again. Dispatch, this is Tower 7. I need verification. Coordinates, nearest post. The voice that answered wasn't from base. It was closer, overlapping. A whisper bleeding through the static. You already verified it. You're in both. The world tilted. I grabbed the desk to steady myself. My map, the one nailed to the wall, had changed. 2 identical towers marked the same ridge, their coordinates printed one line apart. Between them, a thin symbol had appeared in pencil, something shaped like an eye drawn sideways. Wind slammed against the windows. No, not wind. Pressure. A pulse. I turned and saw the horizon folding in on itself. The mountains were bending inward, ridges curling like waves collapsing toward the center valley. The other tower brightened, and my double inside began to move faster, frantic, waving at me now, mouth open in a scream I couldn't hear. The radio flared alive, both our voices overlapping in perfect sync. Stay in your tower. No, I said aloud. But my double said it too, and hearing my voice from outside the glass broke something in me. The floorboards popped. The cabin lights strobed white, then red. The heat roared up through the steel frame until my hands burned when I touched the railing. Smoke rose between the slats of the floor, thin, blue, almost beautiful. I grabbed the emergency pack and kicked the door open. The stairs looked longer than before, stretching down into black fog that rolled like water. Each step twisted slowly, metal groaning under weight that wasn't mine. Halfway down, the sky went bright. I looked back. The other tower was burning now, flames licking up its legs like a fuse. The man inside it was still moving, still waving. The glass shattered outward, and through the shimmer, I saw his face clearly for the first time. It wasn't mine anymore. It was older. Ash gray, mouth black with soot. He mouthed something I couldn't hear, then pointed straight down. The forest floor pulsed like a heartbeat, light seeping through roots and stones. The smoke wasn't rising, it was pouring out of the ground. That's when I realized what "stay in your tower" really meant. The towers weren't safety, they were markers, built on vent shafts that kept whatever burned below from reaching the surface. My logbook wasn't just record-keeping, it was containment. The earth shuddered. The last page in the log flipped itself over. The pen scratched a single line without my hand touching it. Tower 7 terminated. Source active. New watch assigned. I didn't wait. I jumped the last 10 steps, hit dirt, and ran. The heat chased me up the slope, a sound like 1,000 trees exhaling. When I looked back, the tower was gone, both of them, replaced by one pillar of light sinking slowly into the ground. The forest was quiet again, the air cool. When I reached the service road, the radio on my belt clicked on by itself. A calm voice, mine, younger, said, "Tower 7, this is base. Welcome to your post. Log begins at dawn." And somewhere behind me, the faint metallic ping of cooling steel answered, counting down to morning. I used to think the quiet parts of the woods were the safest, the places where the traffic hum dies, and all you can hear is your own breath. That's where I went wrong. Silence in the mountains doesn't mean peace. It means something's listening. This happened near an old logging road west of Marlinton, West Virginia. I was hiking solo, chasing an overlook a coworker mentioned, a view you had to earn with mud. I figured that meant a tough climb, not what I actually found. The map on my phone turned into gray blocks once the signal dropped, so I followed what looked like a path, 2 tire ruts dissolving into roots and ferns. At first it was all the things I love: cool air, dripping branches, the soft smell of wet pine and iron-rich earth. But about half a mile in, the laurels started closing in. Rhododendron thickets out here are like a living fence, thick, springy, and always reaching. I had to shoulder my way through, the waxy leaves squeaking against my jacket. It was around then I started noticing something off about the ground. The roots weren't lying flat. They were arching up, forming little bridges, like the soil had sagged underneath and the trees were holding themselves above it. Some of the roots were so thick I had to step over them like cables. The weird part? A few were freshly scuffed, as if something big had slid them aside recently. By noon, I realized I'd lost the logging road. No footprints, no tire ruts, just moss and that damp smell that lives in the Appalachian shade. I thought about turning back, but the air behind me felt heavier than in front, like walking backward into fog. So I kept going. That's when the laurel started grabbing. You know when branches snag your backpack strap? This wasn't like that. These branches twisted after I passed, catching the edge of my pack like they'd been waiting. When I pulled free, they snapped back slower than they should have, reluctant to let go. I laughed it off. Nerves, dehydration, imagination. I bent down to tie my boot and froze. 2 long grooves trailed through the mud, side by side, leading under a curtain of leaves. At the ends of the grooves were crescent dents, deep, uneven, like claws dragging for purchase. No paw prints, just drag marks. I tried telling myself it was from a fallen branch or maybe a bear cub sliding downhill. But when I crouched closer, I noticed the mud at the bottom of those grooves was wet, too wet. The soil there hadn't seen sun in weeks, but it gleamed like something had just moved through. The smell hit me next, not rot exactly, more like soaked wood, the inside of an old stump after you split it open. Sharp and green, but wrong. I turned toward it, and every laurel leaf seemed to angle the same way I did, like they were waiting for my next move. Ahead, The forest floor rose slightly, a hump buried under leaves and fallen sticks. At first, I thought it was a log, but then I noticed the bark wasn't bark. It was root. Dozens of roots, bundled together, coiling into a mound. And under that mound, the soil kept shifting. Slow. Measured. The roots tightened and released, a rhythm too deliberate to be wind. I took a step back and heard something. Faint, deliberate, wood sliding against wood, like joints flexing after being still too long. My hand went to the small hatchet clipped to my pack. I didn't draw it, though. Instinct said movement would make me a target. So I stood there, listening, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. Then came the sound I'll never forget, a dry, hollow pop, like a root snapping free underground. The mound exhaled, no air, just a shift of pressure you feel more than here, and the ground beneath my boots tilted slightly toward it. I wanted to run, but the laurel behind me was packed tight, leaves trembling without a breeze. The mound straightened, unfolding like a hinge. Mud dripped from long, twisted shapes that weren't quite branches, and then, slowly, patiently, the thing took one dragging step forward, its roots pulling free of the earth with a sound like wet rope tightening. It moved with a kind of purpose that didn't belong to plants. The thing rose maybe 7 feet tall, built from fused roots and black mud, shaped vaguely like a person who'd forgotten what bones were for. I remember its smell before I remember its face. Wet bark, fungus, that copper tang of rot after rain. No eyes, no mouth, just those roots weaving in and out of themselves, pulsing like veins. I told myself I was seeing pareidolia. Humans find faces in everything, right? But then the head turned toward me. Not fast, just enough to acknowledge me. That single movement hit me harder than if it had sprinted. It knew I was there. I backed up, my boots sliding in the muck. Every step I took made the ground flex, like roots were lying just beneath the topsoil, moving with me. The laurel branches behind me shook, whispering against each other, though there was no wind. It felt like the forest had started breathing in sync with that thing. I did the dumbest possible thing. I ran. Straight ahead, not caring about direction, just trying to find sky again. The undergrowth tore at my legs. Branches raked my pack. I tripped, slammed my shoulder into a rotted log, and rolled. When I looked up, sunlight broke through the canopy, a narrow shaft of gold landing on the slope ahead. I went for it like a drowning man. The forest thinned, just a little. I burst into a clearing, small, no bigger than a trailer lot, but it felt like freedom. Grass, brambles, old stones half buried in moss. I turned back, gasping. The laurel wall stood motionless again. Nothing followed. Just dark, glossy leaves watching me sway on my feet. For a long minute, I waited. No sound. Then, crack. A single root, pushing up through the soil at the edge of the clearing. Slow, deliberate. I took off again, climbing the slope. My GPS still had no signal, but the compass needle had started twitching in small circles, refusing to settle. The sun was somewhere to my right, so I kept it there, figuring west was my ticket out. That's when I found the stones. They weren't random. They'd been arranged, short broken pillars forming a ring maybe 10 feet wide. Some kind of old foundation, the kind you stumble across and assume used to be a cabin or a mill. Except these had carvings. Not letters, spirals, grooves, repeating ridges that looked grown rather than chiseled. When I brushed one with my fingers, it felt warm. The earth beneath the stones hummed faintly, like a distant generator underfoot. It wasn't sound, it was pressure, vibrating up through my boots into my knees, and right in the middle of that ring, a hollow. A small circular pit lined with moss, and the same wet, dark soil that thing had been made of. I don't remember deciding to kneel. My knees just folded. The smell was stronger there, sharp and metallic, almost sweet. My vision swam for a second. I think I said something, maybe a prayer, maybe an apology. Then the trees behind me whispered again. Not from wind, from weight. Something heavy pressing down roots through the soil, circling. I turned, and for a moment everything in my body went still. The root walker stood halfway between the clearing and the trees, but it wasn't alone anymore. The trunks around it were bending inward, their roots twitching in the ground like fingers testing the air. Bark split open in long, vertical lines, and beneath each tier I saw that same black mud pulsing with veins of red sap. It wasn't one thing. It was part of something larger, something spreading through the whole ridge. I took a step backward, and my heel sank into the pit. The ground there was soft as lung tissue. I jerked my foot free, and the hole exhaled a slow, damp breath. The air turned colder instantly, like something had opened below me. That's when I heard the sound, low and slow, like a voice made of wood grinding against stone. It wasn't words, but it meant something. I could feel the meaning in my chest. Stay still. I didn't listen. I ran until my legs burned and my lungs felt full of smoke. I ran until I could see a line of fence posts ahead, the kind that marks the edge of old farmland. I scrambled over one and collapsed in the grass on the other side. When I turned to look back, the tree line was quiet, still, empty. Except for the fence post beside me. Its base had started to twist, slowly, deliberately, back toward the woods. By the time I made it back to my car, dusk had drained most of the color out of the sky. My boots were caked in mud so thick it looked like I'd been wading through tar. Every step left a wet print across the gravel pull-off. I just stood there for a second, hands on the hood, trying to convince myself I hadn't lost my mind out there. The forest behind me was quiet again. No shifting, no whispering leaves, just the ordinary chirp of crickets and the thrum of distant frogs. That normal sound, the kind you never notice until it's gone, almost broke me. I laughed too loud, a ragged bark that turned into a sob halfway out. I drove fast. Didn't care about potholes. Didn't care about rocks hitting the undercarriage. The road snaked down toward the valley, and I kept glancing at the rearview mirror even though there was nothing to see. Every few seconds, my headlights caught dust swirling behind me, and each time I swore I saw a darker shadow keeping pace just beyond the beam. When I finally hit cell range, I pulled over by a gas station. I must have looked insane. Mud to my knees, eyes wide, shaking. The attendant stepped out and asked if I'd wrecked somewhere. I told him I'd gotten turned around hiking, that I'd fallen into a root pit or something. He just nodded like that explained everything and handed me a towel. I tried to sleep that night in a cheap motel off Route 219, but I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the ground under me flex. Soft, like something was breathing below the floorboards. I got up twice to check the carpet for water leaks. Dry. Always dry. At dawn, I drove home. Told myself I was done with the woods for a while. Told myself I'd just been dehydrated, disoriented, panicked. It almost worked. Until about a week later. It started small. The potted fern by my kitchen window. I'd had it for years, never paid attention to it. One morning I walked in and saw its roots poking through the bottom of the pot. Not dangling, reaching. They'd split the ceramic, curling toward the sunlight. Then, when I took out the trash a few nights later, I saw tracks in the wet soil by my porch steps. Not animal tracks, not boot prints. Just two shallow trenches running side by side, curving around my shed before disappearing into the tree line. I moved the fern outside the next day. Didn't help. The smell followed me inside. Wet bark and copper, that same scent from the hollow. I started hearing it again, too. That hush-click rhythm. At first, I thought it was my old ceiling fan wobbling, but when I turned it off, the sound kept going. It came from the floor, from the beams, from beneath the house. I barely slept for 3 nights straight. By the fourth, exhaustion won. I woke up to the sound of creaking wood, the kind you hear when someone heavy steps on old planks. I sat up and saw movement in the window, my porch railing, dark, wet, writhing just slightly. When I went to the door, the air smelled like rain, but it wasn't raining. The ground was slick with a thin layer of mud, fresh and black, even though it hadn't stormed in days. I stepped outside barefoot and looked toward the tree line. Something was standing there, just past the light's reach, not moving, just watching. The shape was wrong, wider at the base, its upper half hunched under the weight of its own limbs. I couldn't see a face, but I could hear it again, that slow grinding sound, the one that carried meaning. Only this time, it wasn't telling me to stay still. It was saying something new, something that made my stomach drop. You took a piece. I ran back inside and locked the door, sat on the kitchen floor until the sun came up. When I finally looked out again, there were root tracks across the porch, thin, twisting, patient. That was 3 months ago. I moved 2 states away, left my car, my house, even my hiking gear behind. Thought distance would fix it. But last night, when I took the trash out at my new place, I found a small sprig of rhododendron growing from the edge of my driveway. The soil around it was wet, and underneath I swear I could hear the ground breathing again. My cousin Caleb and I were clearing the roadside before the storm hit, cutting brush, hauling junk, making sure the culvert wouldn't flood again. We do it every spring, partly out of habit, partly because no one else will. Folks around this hollow say the county forgets us unless something catches fire. The cross was half buried in the ditch, leaning under wet grass and bottles. Just a little wooden roadside memorial, white paint flaking, silk flowers long dead, one arm broken where a truck must have clipped it. A name was still burned into the wood, M. Danner, 1999. Caleb squinted at it and said, "Storm'll take that clean away." "Yeah," I answered, already lifting it. The ground sucked at its base, mud bubbling around my gloves. We set it by the fence line, upright and clean, out of the drainage path. Felt like the decent thing to do. Neither of us noticed the second stake buried behind it until later, the one with no name. By the time we finished, the wind had started to roll in. A hard gray rain followed us back to the house, thunder sliding through the valley like slow freight. We parked the truck, made coffee, and watched the downpour from the porch. "That cross," Caleb said finally. "You know who that was for?" "Couple from Blue Sulphur," I said. "Wrecked their pickup 20 years back, took the curve too fast." He nodded, but didn't look convinced. "Strange. I thought that spot had 2 crosses once." I shrugged. Maybe the other one washed off. The rain hit harder then, blurring the road out front. For a second, I thought I saw something white standing upright again in the ditch, just for a heartbeat. Then it vanished behind the curtain of water. By nightfall, the storm had passed, leaving the air heavy and wet. The generator hummed, lights flickering now and then. Caleb bunked on the couch. I headed to the spare room, still smelling rain in my hair. I woke sometime after midnight to a sound like nails dragging over siding, slow, steady, not animal. It circled the house once, then stopped at the back door. I waited, holding my breath. No knock. Just silence, and that soft creak of wood shifting under weight. When I finally looked outside, nothing moved. The grass lay flat from wind. The ditch gleamed with runoff. The cross was still there by the fence, upright, shining faint in moonlight. But something else caught my eye. A second shape next to it, shorter, thicker, like a shadow of the first. I turned the porch light on. It was gone. Caleb was up before sunrise, nursing black coffee and staring through the window. "You hear anything last night?" I asked. He nodded without looking away. "Sounded like someone walking around the porch." I told him about the scraping. He didn't answer, just stood and walked outside. I followed. The ground around the house was soaked, our boot prints mixing with smaller marks, bare feet, pressed deep in the mud, leading from the road to the back steps. "Could be kids," I said, though it came out weak. He crouched by the prints, tracing the edge of one with his finger. "No," he said quietly. "These ain't from last night. They're filling from the bottom up." I didn't understand until I saw the water pooling inside each print, bubbling like air escaping from beneath. We followed the tracks down to the ditch. Both crosses had fallen again. The one with the name was face down, washed clean. The unnamed one was standing straight as a survey post. Caleb leaned closer, then stepped back fast. "Look," he said. On the fresh wood, black letters had appeared, letters burned deep and uneven. M. Danner. Same name, same handwriting. But this time, the date underneath wasn't 1999. It was today. We stared at that name burning through the wet wood until steam rose off it like breath. Caleb swore under his breath and backed away. The smell hit me next. Oak char and wet soil, faint but fresh, like the cross had just come out of a fire. "Lightning strike?" I said, though no scorch marks touched the grass. Caleb just shook his head. "You don't get letters that clean from lightning." We left it and climbed back up the hill. All morning the sky couldn't decide what to do. Sun for a few minutes. Then a low growl of thunder rolling through clear blue. I tried to fix breakfast, but every clink of a pan made me flinch. The generator hummed steady until noon, then sputtered once, twice, and cut off completely. I went out to check the line, but the extension cord was fine. The air felt heavy again, humming like a storm without wind. That's when I noticed the smell returning, wood smoke and wet dirt, and saw Caleb standing by the porch railing, staring downhill. The two crosses were upright again. The first one, ours, looked newly painted, bright white. The second, the unnamed one, had split at the base and sprouted a third arm halfway down, like it was growing into something else. "Don't touch it," I said, but he was already walking down the slope. The closer we got, the stronger the smell of burned cedar. The ditch water steamed. Around the base of the crosses, the mud had hardened into little shapes, prints again, bare feet pointing toward the house. "Somebody's screwing with us," Caleb muttered. "Out here?" I said. "Who?" He didn't answer. He reached for the nameless cross and stopped. Something moved underneath it, just enough to rock the post. The water in the ditch rippled outward in slow rings. Then a thin bubble surfaced, popped, and left behind a faint voice under the hiss of runoff, like someone speaking through wet cloth. A woman's voice. "Still waiting." Caleb jerked back so hard he slipped into the mud. I grabbed him by the jacket and hauled him out. We didn't look back. We holed up inside the rest of the day, curtains drawn. By evening, thunder came again. The power blinked twice and died for good. I lit a lantern. The house smelled like wet wood and ozone. Caleb sat on the couch, staring at his hands. "I dreamed about her," he said finally. "The one in that wreck. She was standing by the ditch. Said she wasn't finished being buried." "Dream," I said, though the word felt wrong in my mouth. "Maybe," he whispered, "but she said we owed her." We didn't sleep that night. Around 2 a.m., the first knock came. A single, hollow thunk from the back door. We froze. It came again. Thunk. Like wood meeting wood. I crept to the window. The rain had started again, light but steady. In the yard stood a figure, white dress plastered to her skin, head tilted, hair slick across her face. She wasn't moving, but her shadow stretched long and wrong across the ground, bending toward the ditch instead of the house. Caleb whispered my name. When I turned, he was pointing to the mantel. The brass clock had stopped. The hands sat on midnight. The lantern flickered, dimming for a breath. Then the smell came back. Burned cedar, wet soil, the tang of rain. Another thunk. This time, the sound wasn't from outside. It came from the crawl space beneath the floorboards, dull and close. The boards flexed under my feet. I grabbed the flashlight and pulled open the cellar hatch. The beam cut through cobwebs, dust, and mud. Fresh mud, wet and black, smeared across the joists. Something had been dug up from below. In the center of the crawl space sat a small wooden cross, newly carved, still dripping. My name burned into it, the edges red hot. Behind me, the front door opened on its own, and the storm started again. When the front door swung open, the wind didn't come with it. No gust. No rain, just silence so heavy it pressed the air flat. The only sound left was the drip of water off my boots and the faint hiss of something burning under the floor. Caleb whispered, "Close it." I tried. The door wouldn't move. The hinges groaned, but it felt like someone was pulling it from the other side. I looked down and saw muddy footprints leading into the house, bare feet again, glistening wet, vanishing one by one into the hallway. Caleb grabbed the lantern and followed me toward the living room. The light shook, scattering shadows up the walls. The smell of burned cedar filled the house, thick and sweet. The sound of rain had stopped entirely. "Don't look at it," Caleb muttered, like he'd already seen something he shouldn't. The footprints ended in front of the fireplace. Ash lay in a cold gray heap there. Ashes I didn't remember leaving. Something white stuck out from the center. A sliver of wood. Another cross. This one was smaller, carved clean. My name burned deep across the center beam. Beneath it, another name had been etched and then scratched out, leaving grooves in the wood. Caleb crouched to look closer. "That's hers," he said. "The one who died. They must have used the same wood." Before I could answer, the lantern flared. The flame stretched sideways, pulled toward the wall where the framed photographs hung. The pictures rattled, then fell one by one. Behind them, the wallpaper had begun to blister. Something moved beneath it, slow circular bulges pressing through the pattern like fingers from behind. The sound that came with it wasn't whispering now. It was breathing. I stepped back. The cross in the hearth cracked down the middle, a thin line of smoke curling up like a signal. Beneath the smoke came a voice, soft, female, soaked in static. "Debt cleared when the ground evens." "What?" Caleb shouted. The floor trembled under us, dust falling from the ceiling. I looked out the front window. The ditch outside was rising, filling with mud, swelling up level with the road, as if the earth itself was exhaling. Something beneath it was pushing upward. We ran for the porch, but the doorframe had warped, trapping the knob in swollen wood. I kicked it twice before it gave. Outside, the air shimmered gray-blue, no wind, just pressure. The two crosses by the fence were gone. In their place, the ground had split open. A shallow pit yawned there, shaped like a body. Caleb stared at it. "That's not—" He didn't finish. A hand, dark with mud, fingers slick, rose from the pit and clamped around his ankle. He screamed, falling backward. I grabbed him, pulled hard, but the ground kept swallowing. The mud didn't splash. It folded, closing over him inch by inch like a mouth. "Caleb!" I yelled. He locked eyes with me for half a second before the mud took him whole. Then the pit smoothed over, flat and still. The silence after was worse than the storm. I dropped to my knees, digging with both hands, but the earth had already hardened. All that remained was one small wooden cross lying on top, freshly carved, Caleb's name scorched into it. I stayed there until dawn, not crying, not moving, just waiting for the sound of thunder that never came. When I finally stood, the road was dry, the ditch perfectly leveled. The fence posts gleamed white. The old cross we'd found yesterday stood in the center again, its letters clear, the date returned to 1999. Two names beneath it now. M. Danner, C. Rains. I started to walk home, but halfway up the hill I saw a third line burned faintly into the base, letters unfinished, curling up from the grain like smoke still deciding what to spell. The first was an E, the rest hadn't been written yet. I take pictures of forgotten places for a living. Old train stations, collapsed barns, mines turned to ghost mouths. The Appalachian gorge I hiked that day was supposed to be another quick shoot. Green walls, waterfall light, an easy drive home. I didn't plan to find anything alive down there. Not like that. The trail was half swallowed by summer. Everything dripped. Rock, air, me. The gorge floor was soft with moss and black shale, slick as oil. My camera strap kept slipping from my shoulder. Half a mile in, I saw a color that didn't belong. Not green, not brown. It was like seeing velvet underwater, deep, shifting, almost luminous. A patch of moss no bigger than a jacket sleeve covered a flat boulder beside the stream. The light hit it just right, and I swear it moved. I crouched for a macro shot, macro being my weakness. Texture, color, the little alien worlds no one notices. Through the lens, the moss looked strange. Each filament stood taller than it should have, tips trembling slightly. When I exhaled, it quivered, as if breathing with me. I brushed my fingers across it, light as a touch on cloth. It was warm. The instant my skin made contact, a pulse ran up my wrist, subtle, like the tremor after static shocks you. I pulled back. A single hair-thin strand clung to my glove. I shook it off and watched it fall, tiny and harmless. I told myself it was nothing. I took my shots, climbed back to the car, and by sunset I was in a cheap motel with sore legs and 200 photos ready for editing. That's when the smell started. Wet stone and sap, faint but constant. I thought it was mud on my boots, but it came from my camera bag. Inside, my lens cloth was damp. Green streaks stained it, the same luminous shade as the moss. When I lifted it to the light, the pattern on the fabric looked like veins branching under skin. By morning, the streaks had spread across the table where I'd set my gear. I wiped them away with a towel. The towel came back slimy, threads sticking to my hand like spider silk. I tossed it, packed, and drove home. I live 3 hours north, windows down, radio loud, trying not to think about the smell that still clung to me, green, metallic, like rain after lightning. At a gas station halfway home, I noticed something on the back of my wrist. A thin green line, faint as a vein, curling from the base of my thumb toward my elbow. I rubbed at it. It didn't smear. It didn't feel like paint either, just skin, warm and wrong. By the time I reached home, it had reached my bicep. I showered for nearly an hour, scrubbing until my arm turned raw. The line faded under the heat, then slowly returned, brighter, as if it liked the water. I spent that night editing the gorge shots. Halfway through, my screen glitched. Each photo shimmered for a second, colors shifting, greens too bright, shadows crawling upward. When I zoomed in on one frame, I froze. The moss patch wasn't just on the rock anymore. In the last few photos, it had spread toward the bottom edge of the frame, toward me. I deleted the pictures, all of them. But when I checked the recycle bin, they'd reappeared under a new folder labeled Growth. The first file was timestamped tomorrow morning. I shut the laptop and sat in the dark, breathing hard. Somewhere under the hum of the fridge, I could hear a soft rustling, like something brushing the inside of drywall. I lifted my arm again. The green had reached my shoulder now. The skin felt tight, smooth, soft, like the boulder beside the stream. And when I touched it, it felt warm, like it was breathing back. By morning, the line of green had split into thin branches that crawled down my chest like ivy searching for a trellis. I didn't feel sick, just heavy, warm, and strangely calm. The smell of wet earth hung in the house, the kind that clings to a cave long after rain. I should have gone to a hospital. Instead, I took pictures. That's what I do when I panic. I document. The camera caught details I hadn't noticed in the mirror. The green wasn't just on the surface anymore. It shimmered faintly under the skin, like veins filled with light. When the flash went off, I heard something whisper, so soft, it could have been a trick of my ears. A word I couldn't place, something like home. I drove to the nearest urgent care anyway, sleeves down, rehearsing how to sound sane. The nurse barely looked at my arm before her face went pale. "That's not chemical burn," she murmured and left the room. A minute later, the overhead lights flickered and the smell hit again, stronger this time, sweet and damp. I looked down. Tiny green filaments had started to creep past my cuffs, unfurling toward the fluorescent lights above me. I ran before anyone came back. Outside, the sunlight didn't feel right. Too bright, almost hungry. My shadow shimmered faintly around the edges, a halo of faint green motes drifting upward like pollen. I brushed them away, but they clung to my fingers, pulsing faintly with each heartbeat. By the time I made it home, the house had changed. Moss covered the corners of my living room wall, climbing upward in neat patterns. It wasn't random growth. Each patch was rectangular, the same size as the photos I'd hung there years ago. And the laptop I'd left closed on the table was open again. The folder labeled Growth was still there, but it had multiplied. Growth 2, Growth 3, Growth 4. Each one held hundreds of images of my house, all taken from impossible angles. One showed the hallway from the ceiling, another the kitchen from inside the wall. The latest file, stamped only minutes earlier, showed me standing in the living room, hand on my camera, head tilted toward the light. Except I hadn't touched the shutter. I turned off the computer, unplugged it, and sat on the floor, breathing through my teeth. The moss on the wall rippled once, almost like it sighed. A faint vibration ran through the floorboards, the same rhythm as my pulse. I tried calling Caleb, another photographer I knew, but my phone screen filled with static, faint green light blooming in the pixels. Words appeared for half a second before the device died entirely. Let it spread. That was the moment I realized I wasn't afraid. I should have been screaming. Instead, the calm came back, slow, settling deep in my bones like warm mud. I could feel the moss now, not just on me but in the walls, the floor, the air. The sun dipped low, throwing a golden-green haze through the windows. The plants outside my house leaned toward the glass, bending as though pulled by breath. The air thickened with the scent of rain and chlorophyll. When I looked at my hands, the skin had changed, finer, smoother, faintly translucent. I pressed a fingertip to the wall, and it sank slightly into the moss like water receiving a drop. For a second, I saw through it, roots stretching in all directions, tiny lights pulsing like heartbeats. The earth outside answered in low hums I could almost understand. Not language exactly, more like invitation. The whisper came again, clearer now, curling from inside my head instead of my ears. "You brought us home." And for the first time, I whispered back, "I know." That's when the house exhaled, a soft, warm gust that smelled like the gorge, and every patch of moss began to glow. The glow never faded. It just softened, warm, golden, steady as a heartbeat. Every surface of the house pulsed with it, the walls, the floor, the edges of furniture. When I breathed, the light brightened. When I held still, it dimmed. I stopped trying to clean it off my skin days ago. The moss had spread across my chest, up my neck, thin filaments tracing my jaw. In the mirror, I didn't look sick. I looked balanced, skin smooth, veins green as new shoots. My pupils had narrowed to slits. I told myself I was still me, just changed. But that wasn't true anymore. It started whispering full sentences now, not words. Not from outside, from within, like thought shared between cells. "You took us from the hollow. You gave us light again." I didn't argue. I'd stopped trying to define us. When I stepped outside, I saw the moss had left the walls too. The driveway shimmered with faint green veins running under the gravel. My car tires had bloomed, tiny clusters of filament stretching toward the sky. The trees around the yard had deepened in color, bark slick and black, leaves almost translucent. Everywhere I looked, something was breathing with me. By evening, the air hummed with energy. I could hear roots moving beneath the soil, slow, deliberate, drawing lines that matched my pulse. When I placed my palm on the ground, it responded. The dirt felt alive, tender, warm. A thought rose, not mine, but clear inside my head. Return what you took. I knew what it meant. The patch of moss from the gorge, the first touch, the first spark. It wasn't content staying here. It wanted to finish what had started, to connect what had been separated. So I packed my camera and drove south again. The gorge looked the same at first glance, lush, wet, impossibly green. But when I stepped onto the trail, I realized the color wasn't normal. The greens shimmered in rhythm, faintly glowing like a pulse under skin. My footsteps echoed in pairs. Each sound answered half a beat later, like something followed. The deeper I went, the more the air thickened, wet and warm, smelling of moss and rain and iron. When I reached the stream, the boulder was waiting, bare, smooth, stripped clean. The patch I'd touched was gone, replaced by a shallow depression that pulsed faintly, breathing in time with me. I knelt and laid my hand on it. The warmth matched exactly, same temperature, same rhythm. "Here," I whispered. "I brought you back." The moss on my arm stirred like wind through grass. Filaments lifted, reaching. They slid from my skin in thin threads, bridging the space between my palm and the stone. When they touched, light flooded upward, green-white, bright enough to wash the gorge in day. I didn't feel pain, just relief. The light spread through the trees, down the water, into the soil. Every leaf shimmered. The moss climbed my face, my eyes, and I could see what it saw. Roots twisting beneath mountains, veins running through stone, rivers glowing with memory. For a moment, I understood everything. How old it was, how long it had waited underground, locked away from sunlight, until someone careless and curious had given it a path home. Me. When the glow faded, there was only quiet. The forest looked normal again. My camera lay beside me, lens fogged, still recording. My skin was clear, pale, human once more. I started to laugh, shaky with relief, until I noticed what the camera's light was catching. Every rock, every tree, every blade of grass around me was coated in a thin sheen of green. A new growth, my growth. The whisper came again, distant but certain. "Thank you, root." And beneath my feet, the earth answered, soft and patient, as something vast began to breathe again. People think surveying is just measuring dirt, but the ground remembers more than it should. My name's Nick Hall. I run line work for a small geological contractor out of Beckley. The job that started all this was routine. Grade alignment for a new access road near Old Coal Country, 5 miles past, where the maps stopped pretending to be current. It was late autumn, thin fog clinging to the valley like breath on glass. My crew, just me and 2 others, Danny and Keats, set up base near an abandoned drift mouth that didn't appear on any state chart. No name, no date. The opening was half collapsed, ribbed with rusted timbers, but our laser readouts kept spiking every time we passed it. "Magnetic interference," Keats said. "Probably leftover iron." Except it wasn't. The readings pulsed rhythmically, like something underground was keeping time. We ignored it. I hammered the first survey pin into the soil, checked the GPS, marked the angle. When I turned back, the stake behind me was gone. Not pulled up, just gone. Danny laughed. "You sure you put it in the ground, boss?" I pointed to the impression in the dirt. The hole was clean, like the metal had never been there. The total station still showed its reflection, though, tiny mirror ping 3 feet to the right of the missing stake. "That's not possible," Keats muttered. We reset and moved on. Every 50 feet, the same pattern repeated. New pin, quick reading, disappearance. The GPS log marked all of them as present, perfectly aligned in a straight line leading toward the collapsed drift. The math said our last stake was inside the hill. By noon, the fog thickened into soup. Our radios crackled with phantom bursts, the kind you get when signals cross. I called it for lunch, mostly to shake off the tension. Danny opened a sandwich, grinning. "You think it's haunted or magnetic or what?" "Neither," I said. "Just bad data." But I didn't believe that. While the others ate, I walked back to double-check our first line. I expected bare dirt. Instead, the pins were all there again, every single one, perfectly upright, heads gleaming like new. The weirdest part? They weren't ours. Each was older, hand-forged, capped with brass, initials stamped along the shaft, BMH, 1924. I brushed the dirt off one and felt heat. Not sun-warm, but body heat, like something alive was just under the surface. The wind shifted then, carrying the smell of coal dust and wet metal. The valley went quiet, the kind of quiet where even your heartbeat feels too loud. "Nick!" Keats shouted from ahead. When I turned, both he and Danny were standing at the drift mouth. Somehow, the collapse looked smaller, the opening wider than it had been that morning. Inside was only darkness, breathing cold air that smelled like rain and smoke. Danny grinned nervously. "There's your problem. It's reading the old mine grid, probably tunnels right under us." "Those tunnels were sealed 100 years ago," I said. He leaned closer to peer in, and froze. "Jesus," he whispered. "There's light down there." Sure enough, a faint orange glow pulsed deep inside, slow as a heartbeat. The ground under my boots trembled once, like something shifting far below. The nearest stake tipped over, then stood back up on its own. "Pack it up," I said. "Now." We loaded the gear in record time, none of us talking. When we reached the truck, the instruments were still running. The screen that should have shown our path now displayed a perfect circle of pins, every one labeled active. I shut the case and turned the ignition. From somewhere behind us, down in that fog, came the metallic sound of a hammer striking steel, once, twice, over and over, driving something deep into the earth. We told ourselves we weren't going back. The readings were wrong, the ground unstable, and the company would just send a bigger crew with heavier gear. Easy. By morning, the client called asking why our coordinates formed a perfect circle. "It's reading as an enclosed grid," he said, "like you surveyed around a hole." That word, hole, stuck with me. Danny insisted we should return just to pull the stakes and finish clean. I agreed, even though the pit in my stomach said don't. By noon, we were back at the valley mouth. The fog had burned off, leaving the trees so still it looked staged. We expected to see our pin circle. Instead, there were two. One nested inside the other. "Somebody's screwing with us," Keats muttered, kneeling by the nearest stake. He tapped it with his wrench. The metal rang clear, too clear, like striking glass. The brass cap on this one had a different marking, BMH 1925. The year had changed. I scanned the site. The second circle extended into the hillside, where the drift mouth gaped wider than before. My instruments started flashing, elevation off by 12 feet, magnetic field unstable. The compass needle spun twice and locked, pointing straight into the drift. We set up a new total station to triangulate just to prove the data wrong. The first ping bounced clean. The second one went dead halfway through, laser swallowed by darkness. The screen read, "Return signal received." "Received from where?" Danny asked. The display changed again. Source, internal. That's when the air changed. Damp, heavy, carrying the smell of burning oil. The forest noise stopped like someone had cut a wire. From inside the drift came the slow scrape of metal against stone. Once, twice, again. Each stroke ended with a hollow clang. Keats grabbed my shoulder. "Nick, look." The nearest stake was sinking. The dirt folded around it, drawing it down inch by inch until only the brass cap showed. The next one followed, then the next. We backed up toward the truck. I kept counting, 3 pins left, 2, 1, until the final stake vanished under the soil with a sound like air leaving a pipe. The ground trembled and went still. For a heartbeat, it felt over. Then the soil erupted, pins shooting upward in a wide ring, taller now, their heads glowing faint orange. They weren't hammered in anymore. They were growing. Danny bolted for the truck. Keats and I followed, but when we turned to look back, the circle had expanded. The stakes on the far side were already threading together by fine copper wire, sketching a lattice across the ground. In the center, the drift mouth pulsed, wider now, throwing off faint heat. We piled into the cab. Danny twisted the key. Nothing. Just a cough. I looked out the windshield. The road behind us was gone, swallowed by low mist, and something moved within it. Figures, faint outlines walking in a slow circle around the truck. I couldn't tell if they were people or shadows shaped by the heat. Keats reached for the door handle. "We can cut through the woods." The door slammed itself shut, locking from the inside. Every window fogged over at once, writing words in backward letters on the glass. "Measure again." Then the pins outside began striking themselves, one by one, metal ringing in rhythm. A voice followed, low, male, measured. "Grade complete. Survey approved." The radio crackled alive, our client's voice breaking through. "Nick, your data's looping again. You're drawing tunnels that don't exist." I stared at the map on the screen. The circles were gone, replaced by a perfect spiral curling down into the earth. At its center blinked a single label: U. The truck lights flickered once. Then the engine started by itself. The gear shift dropped into drive, and we began rolling toward the drift without touching the pedals. The truck moved on its own, slow, steady, like something heavy was pushing from behind. Gravel popped under the tires, and the steering wheel tugged against my grip even though the road ahead was only fog. "Kill it!" Keats shouted. I yanked the key from the ignition. The engine kept running. The dashboard lights flickered between drive and neutral, like the truck couldn't decide where it belonged. Ahead, the drift glowed faintly orange, the same color as the pins. The air pouring out of it wasn't smoke exactly, but something thicker. Dust, hot and metallic, smelling like rusted blood. Danny slammed his door open and jumped out, stumbling backward. "Screw this, Nick. I'm walking." He didn't make it 10 feet before the ground under him gave a dry pop. The dirt sagged, then folded. His boots sank ankle deep. He screamed, but the sound cut short, muffled like a microphone swallowing feedback. When I reached for him, my hand brushed his shoulder, warm, solid. Then it wasn't. He was just gone. The earth closed, flat as if he'd never been there. Keats was shaking beside me, whispering something over and over. I thought it was a prayer until I caught the words, BMH, 1926. The pins outside glowed brighter. They weren't standing in a circle anymore. They were descending, one after another, down into the drift, spiraling like a slow drain. Each one hammered itself once before vanishing. The voice came back through the radio, calm, almost proud. "Alignment achieved. Tunnel stable." "Who is this?" I yelled. Static. Then, "You finished what we started." I looked toward the drift. The orange glow had turned into a solid beam reaching up the slope, cutting through fog. Inside, the walls shimmered like wet copper, alive with movement. Shadows turning in slow loops, hammering in rhythm. Keats gripped my sleeve. "It's not a mine," he said. "It's using us to build something new." The ground jolted hard enough to rattle the windshield. A low groan rolled under us, deep and hollow, like the valley itself taking a breath. I felt pressure in my ears, the kind you get underground when the air's too heavy. We ran. The fog made every direction the same. My compass spun wildly, the needle twitching like it was afraid. Behind us came the sound of metal striking rock, clang, 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 faster now, overlapping until it sounded like machinery. We reached the ridge crest, gasping. From there, the valley looked wrong. The trees weren't trees anymore, just dark columns arranged in perfect grid lines. The drift at the center burned bright white now, a spiral of light pulling downward, sucking the mist in. Keats turned to me, face pale. If it's a tunnel, it needs a surveyor. I didn't understand until I looked down. Every GPS beacon we'd planted was still active, blinking in sync with the light from below, and one of them was still on my belt. Its screen read, "Position fixed, depth 000FT. Then the numbers began counting downward. Slow, steady, like an elevator descending. Keats grabbed it, threw it as far as he could. The beacon hit the dirt and kept beeping from underground, as if the ground had swallowed it whole. He took one step backward, then stiffened. "Nick," he whispered, "do you feel that?" I did. The soil under our boots was breathing, rising and falling in shallow waves. I don't remember running. Only that I reached the truck again, and the engine was idling, quiet now, patient. The radio played faintly, the same measured male voice repeating one line, "Survey complete, awaiting next section." I drove until the signal faded. When I finally stopped for gas an hour later, I looked in the mirror and saw something in the bed of the truck. One of the old brass pins, mud still clinging to its base. The initials were fresh this time, not BMHNH 2025, and the metal was still warm, pulsing softly, like it had just been hammered into place. I grew up in a mountain town that had one rule everyone knew. When the flood siren sounds, you run uphill. You don't wait. You don't check the river. You just go. Thing is, the siren hadn't blown in 23 years. Not since the flood of '02. Most folks forgot it even worked. The control box rusted outside the volunteer firehouse, padlocked shut and half swallowed by vines. So when it went off again last spring, on a night with clear skies and no rain, I thought I was dreaming. It started low, the kind of sound that seems to crawl up from the ground before it breaks the air, a deep, shaking howl that rolled through the valley and rattled every window in town. I was working late at the hardware store, closing shift. The hum of fluorescent lights cut out the second the siren started. Everything went silent, except that one long note sliding up into the dark. At first, I laughed. "Guess the old beast still works," I told the empty aisles. But when I stepped outside, my stomach dropped. The entire valley was lit by red strobes from the fire tower, flashing in perfect rhythm with the siren. Houses stood quiet, no porch lights, no movement. The air had that strange charged feeling before a storm, but the sky was moonless, empty. The sound came again, longer this time, higher pitched, and the power lines above the street began to hum. I grabbed my phone. No signal, not even a bar. The network clock on the screen froze at 11:47 p.m. The town's main street felt abandoned, like everyone had already gone uphill and forgotten to tell me. I started walking toward the siren tower out of habit, trying to convince myself this was a false alarm. When I reached the firehouse, the padlock on the control box hung open. The inside was clean, almost polished, like someone had serviced it yesterday. The siren still blared overhead, the horn rotating in slow circles. I climbed the ladder halfway and shouted, "Who turned this on?" The sound cut mid-rotation, just stopped. The silence that followed felt wrong, not natural, not empty, but waiting. I climbed down fast and scanned the street. Every window in town was dark, yet I felt watched. Then the lights came back on, not white, not yellow. Red, every bulb, every porch light, Every headlamp in parked trucks glowed that same shade of deep red, steady and pulsing. The siren started again, quieter this time, almost under its breath. That's when I saw the first shadow move. Down near the river road, figures stood ankle-deep in the water, dozens of them, unmoving, faces turned toward town. They weren't people, not exactly. They had outlines, heads, shoulders, but the bodies shimmered like heat over asphalt. The red light flickered through them. One by one, they began walking uphill. Slow, steady, water streaming from their clothes that weren't there. I backed away, heart hammering. My boots echoed too loud on the pavement. The siren rose again, screaming full force, and every figure froze mid-step. The noise stopped them. Then, slowly, they turned their heads toward me. Even from 100 yards away, I felt the pressure of that look, like sound instead of sight, crawling through my chest. I ran. Up Main Street, past shuttered shops, through the square where the clock tower sat, frozen at 11:47. The siren's pitch climbed higher and higher until it cracked. When I reached the ridge road, I turned to look back. The entire valley below was red, pulsing in time with the siren. The river shimmered like glass, and the figures stood at its edge, all facing uphill. Every house had its doors open, and above them, the horn still spun slowly, though the air around it shimmered empty. No machinery, no power, nothing at all holding it there. The siren was blowing for nobody, and it hadn't stopped since. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the siren again, distant, muffled, like it was echoing through my bones. The strange part was that nobody else seemed to notice. The next morning the town looked fine. No red lights, no shadows, no sound. The sun was out, the river calm. I even checked the firehouse again, the padlock back in place, box sealed, the ladder slick with dew. I started doubting myself until I walked into the diner. Everyone was quiet, not scared, just tired. The waitress, Della, poured my coffee without meeting my eyes. "You hear it too?" she said finally. I nodded. She nodded back. "Thought so. Don't say it too loud. Some folks didn't sleep. Some didn't wake up." Her hand shook slightly as she set the cup down. "They called it a false alarm, but that sound wasn't right. My granddaddy said it's the same tone from the flood night." I froze. "The one in 2002? She gave a slow nod. "Same pitch, same sequence. 6 short, 1 long. That was the signal when the dam broke." Outside, a logging truck passed, and for a moment its brakes hissed in a rhythm almost like that pattern. 6 short bursts, 1 long wail. Della's eyes followed the sound. "It's been coming back every year, closer together. Only at night, only for some of us." That afternoon I drove out to the old dam. The place had been sealed since the disaster. Twisted steel, warning signs, and a chain-link gate rusted half open. I parked and walked the last stretch. The air by the river was heavy, wet, metallic, the kind of smell water gets when it's been still too long. I climbed the ridge above the reservoir and stopped cold. In the mud along the bank, boot prints covered the ground, fresh, hundreds of them. Some led toward the broken spillway, others into the water. I knelt and touched one. The impression filled with water instantly, as if the ground exhaled. Then came the first sound. A low moan of metal bending, followed by a single faint whoop, like the first breath of a siren spinning up. It rose in pitch, wavering in the valley air, then cut off. When it started again, it wasn't from the tower in town. It was coming from beneath the river. The sound pulsed under the water like a heartbeat, sending tiny ripples across the surface. The mud trembled. My flashlight beam flickered against the dam wall, catching old lettering still visible beneath the grime. Emergency drainage intake, authorized personnel only. The siren sounded again, clearer now, repeating the exact same pattern. 6 short, 1 long. I recorded it on my phone, hands shaking. The timestamp read 11:47 p.m., though it was only 3:12 in the afternoon. The water began to recede, not drain, but draw back, like a tide reversing. A wide circle of riverbed emerged, glistening with silt. In the center of it, half buried in mud, something metallic turned slowly in the current. A siren horn, smaller than the one in town but identical in shape, its bell still gleaming red beneath the rust. It shouldn't have been there, too far downstream, too deep. As I stepped closer, the horn twitched, turning slightly in my direction, even though no wind moved. Then I heard voices in the water. Not words exactly, just fragments, names, pleas, snatches of radio chatter repeating through the siren's hum. Base to Station 2. Floodgates open. Can't reach. The signal looped, stuttering on the same second, over and over. I stumbled back to shore, heartbeat syncing with the sound. It wasn't a warning. It was replaying. The siren wasn't calling us to safety. It was calling back everyone who never made it out. That night, the siren started again. Same time, 11:47 p.m., sharp as if the air itself was wound to it. I was ready this time. I'd driven to the ridge road before sunset, parked facing the valley, camera ready. The sky looked clean, stars sharp, but the moment that sound rolled through the holler, every light in town flickered red again. The pattern repeated, 6 short, 1 long, just like Della said. And with each pulse, the river below glowed faintly, as if lit from underneath. Through my lens, I saw them, those shapes again, wading through the shallows, rising from water that didn't ripple. At first, I thought it was reflection, fog, light distortion. But the longer I looked, the more real they became. Shirts clinging, faces gray and soft. They moved uphill in unison, not marching but remembering. Then I saw him, Danny Mills, my old classmate. He died in that flood when the bridge collapsed. His face was calm now, like someone dreaming with their eyes open. "Danny!" I shouted before I could stop myself. He turned toward me, not his head, his whole body, like a compass needle snapping north. His mouth opened, water pouring out instead of air. The siren peaked. My car dashboard went black, phone dead. The air turned wet, heavy. I ran to the firehouse, boots slipping on the asphalt slick with dew that wasn't there a second ago. The padlock hung open again. The control box door was swinging. Inside, the manual override switch had already been flipped to on. But the power cable wasn't connected. Cut clean through, no current anywhere near it. The horn rotated above me, slow, steady, drawing breath from nothing. Every time it faced the river, it dimmed. Every time it turned toward town, it brightened. The valley below had changed. Streets shimmered underwater, cars half sunk, rooftops glinting like coins. The same flood, overlaid on the present, water where there shouldn't be water. And in the glow, those figures were everywhere, trudging through the current. At first I thought they were moving toward the firehouse. Then I realized they were moving with the sound, turning each time the siren did, faces upturned, waiting. The air pressed around me, thick with humidity and static. I looked down at the control panel again. A new switch had appeared, not metal, grown out of rust, shaped perfectly into the word rewind. I don't know why I flipped it. Maybe curiosity, maybe mercy. The sound cut. For a second, the world went silent. Then everything reversed. The flood drained back uphill. The figures blurred, stepping backward, water streaming from their mouths into the air, buildings unbent, windows unshattered. And then, just as suddenly, everything froze. A voice came from the speaker mounted on the horn, a man's voice, old, gravelly, calm. Flood warning canceled, all accounted for. My breath caught. The valley below looked dry again. No lights, no movement. The houses stood neat and clean, like nothing had ever touched them. I almost believed it, until I noticed the names painted on the rooftops. Big white letters, the kind used for rescue mapping. Every one of them spelled Hall. My name, on every roof. The wind kicked up. The horn turned toward me once more, slow, deliberate. The light inside it flickered red, then white, then went dark. In the stillness that followed, I heard a softer siren, farther away, almost gentle, coming from the direction of my house on the ridge. I started running, but halfway up the road, the sound began to echo inside my skull instead of the air. Each pulse matched my heartbeat. My phone buzzed once before dying completely, flashing a single notification: emergency alert, flood warning, issued 5/16/2002, 23 years ago. I looked down at the water pooled across the asphalt. My reflection stared back, rippling slightly. It smiled, and behind me, the siren began again, 6 short, 1 long, calling us all uphill like it always had. Only now I knew what it was calling back, and this time I didn't run. Trail work is supposed to be predictable. You walk, you clear, you mark. The dirt tells you everything. That's why the prints threw me off. They were perfect, deep in fresh clay I'd raked smooth less than a minute earlier, and they were mine. Same tread pattern, same notch on the heel where a Pulaski once slipped and took a chip out. I was up on Ridge Spur that morning, a thin trail curling above the valley near Elk Gap. My job? Flag storm damage before the next maintenance crew came through. It was the kind of clear, humming day the mountains save for people who work alone. The first track sat just beyond the overlook spur. I stopped, stared, then looked behind me. My own prints trailed the other way, shallower, older. The new one faced forward. "Early hiker," I muttered, just to make sound. I followed. Whoever it was had my stride exactly, 31 inches heel to toe, no drift. The dirt stayed moist enough to hold shape, every step a mirror of mine. 10 minutes later, the prints veered around a blowdown and rejoined the trail where I would have stepped if I hadn't paused. That's when I noticed something worse. The tracks stayed wet even where the ground had dried. Dew clung to them like they carried their own weather. I radioed base. "Maintenance 2 to Ranger Station. Anyone log this ridge today?" Static, then Kay's voice, calm and bored. "-2, you're the only one signed out. Copy Stormfront by nightfall." "Copy," I said, though the sky was spotless. Half a mile later, the trail narrowed between rock teeth. No room for 2 people. The prints didn't stumble or sidestep. They floated the center line, clean and confident. My stomach went tight. At the next clearing, I found my wrapper from breakfast sitting on a stump, folded neat. I hadn't eaten yet. The radio hissed again. "2, your tracker's showing 2 signals. You duplicating equipment?" "No," I said. "Strange. Second ping's pacing you about 20 yards ahead." I stared at the path curling uphill. "Probably GPS bounce." "Maybe," she said. "Just stay put till it evens out." But the prints were already pulling away, fresh ones appearing as I watched, tiny bursts of damp soil where nothing touched. I started walking faster, half angry now, half scared of my own imagination. At the ridge notch, the air changed. The woods went silent except for one distant tap, metal on stone, steady as a heartbeat. The next bend opened onto a section we'd closed last season, blocked with brush and a faded trail ended sign. Only the brush was gone. A clean corridor stretched ahead, freshly blazed with white paint still tacky under my glove. Someone my height had painted it. Someone using my reach. "Kay," I said into the mic, "you sure that duplicate's ahead?" "Affirmative," she answered. "Same direction, same pace." Then softer. "It just stopped." The forest felt smaller suddenly, pressed in. I turned slow, scanning trees that all looked too familiar. The path behind me held a single set of prints, mine, leading back only 50 feet before vanishing. I crouched to touch the newest one. The dirt pulsed faintly under my finger, rising and falling like breath. I jerked back. 2? Kay's voice crackled again. Your second ping just passed your first. Wait, now it's right on top of you. The radio went dead. A sound brushed the air beside my ear. Boot sole against soil, close enough that I felt the vibration through the ground. I turned fast, saw only trees, their shadows stretching across the trail. When I looked down again, there were 2 sets of prints, both leading forward, both still wet, and the fresher pair were heavier, pressed deeper into the clay, like whoever wore my boots had started carrying more than my weight. I kept walking because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant believing. The twin set of prints stayed side by side, perfect stride for stride, then slowly drifted apart, mine veering uphill, the others dipping down toward a narrow hollow. I told myself it was runoff, maybe animal interference, anything to keep from naming what I knew. They were choosing their own path now. The air had gone still. Even the cicadas had quit. The only sound left was my gear clinking softly and the occasional rasp of my breath through dry throat. The woods smelled strange, fresh mud and metal, like the moment after lightning. At the next switchback, I pulled my radio. Station, this is Maintenance 2. You still tracking that duplicate ping? Static hissed, then Kay's voice, low and thin. Yeah, but it's not ahead anymore. It's circling. You moving? Yes. A pause. Then it isn't. The ridge narrowed until the trail barely existed, just a soft strip of clay between drop-offs. The duplicate tracks rejoined from the downhill side, crossing in front of me. Same tread, same pressure marks, but heavier again, like whoever made them was digging in against wind. There was no wind. I knelt, and the dirt under my hand felt faintly warm, not sun-warm, body-warm. The scent of ozone thickened until my eyes watered. When I stood, the world had shifted almost imperceptibly. Trees leaned at new angles, moss covering places I'd cleared only yesterday. The white blazes on trunks looked older, cracked, edges curling like paint dried for decades. It wasn't the trail I'd walked up that morning. It was the trail as it had been before. I turned back toward the ridgeline. My prints behind me were gone. Only the others remained, leading forward into that older world. Kay, I said. Confirm time. My watch stopped. 17:23, she replied. And 2, your signals split again. I've got one reading 15 minutes behind, one ahead, and a third fixed dead center. That doesn't happen. Her voice warped mid-sentence, stretching, folding into static. I caught half a word, echo, before it died completely. The smell changed next. Pine and dust gave way to something wetter, heavier, like turned soil and iron. I followed the trail another 100 feet before it opened into a clearing I didn't remember, a shallow basin ringed by stumps, each one freshly cut, though the tools that did it would have rusted to ghosts by now. In the center stood my Pulaski, the same one I'd signed out that morning, handle scarred with my initials. Only now the blade gleamed new, and the tag wired to the grip read a date, July 9th, 1991. The year my predecessor, another maintenance worker named Cole Danner, had vanished up this same spur. I stepped closer, pulse thudding so hard it blurred my vision. The tool was buried halfway into a rotten log, handle upright like a grave marker. Beside it, fresh footprints. My size, facing me. Something moved in the trees beyond. A shape, tall and wrong, bent slightly forward as it walked, careful not to break branches. Its clothes matched mine exactly, vest, radio, orange cap. It reached the clearing's edge and stopped. I saw its boots first, same tread, same nick on the heel. Then it looked up. The face wasn't mine, not exactly, but close enough that my stomach turned cold. Skin, pale as bark, eyes hollowed out like knots in wood. It lifted its hand, slow, deliberate, palm outward. The gesture was familiar because I'd made it hundreds of times on this job, signal to stop cutting, and when it lowered that hand, The woods went silent again. I blinked, and it was gone. Only my Pulaski remained, still buried in the log, blade faintly steaming like it had just been sharpened. Behind me, the radio crackled back to life. Kay's voice came through faint, distant, repeating the same line over and over. 2, return to base. 2, return to base. But the signal wasn't coming from my speaker anymore. It was coming from the handheld clipped to the other vest, hanging from a branch 10 feet away. And it was still warm. The second radio kept repeating the same line, Kay's voice caught in a loop, each call softer than the last. I stared at the vest hanging from the branch. It was mine in every detail. Torn pocket, faded patch, the same oil stain shaped like Tennessee. When I reached for it, the fabric felt damp and cold. The tag inside the collar bore my name, same handwriting, same black Sharpie. Only the ink had bled, the date written beneath blurred into something older. Filed July 9th, 1991. The day Cole Danner vanished. I dropped the vest. It hit the ground with a dull thump, scattering pine needles. The air around it shivered, the way heat does on asphalt, and then stilled again. My pulse hammered in my throat. Every instinct screamed to turn back, but the trail behind me was gone, swallowed by mist that had crept in without sound. The woods smelled of wet metal and cedar rot. I picked up the Pulaski from the log. The blade gleamed as if it had been polished minutes ago. When I looked at my reflection, it blinked. A whisper threaded through the trees. Not words, exactly, something between breath and echo. I caught pieces. Stay on trail. Follow through. Finish your line. I moved downhill, drawn by the sound. The prints, my prints, led into the hollow. They grew clearer with every step, pressed deeper, as if whatever walked ahead was sinking into softer ground. The fog thickened until it swallowed color. The white blazes glowed faintly green. Somewhere below, water trickled, rhythmic as a pulse. At the hollow's center stood a marker post, one of ours, half buried in moss. The numbers stenciled on it were wrong, out of sequence by a full mile. I brushed dirt off and froze. Under the numbering was a second set of letters carved by hand. C.D. Cole Danner. The earth beneath the post trembled once, like something shifting just under the surface. I stepped back, but the ground held me, soft, sticky, almost breathing. A voice came from below this time, muffled but clear. Trade places. I spun, searching for movement, but the mist folded tight around the trees, muting every sound. The footprints in front of me filled slowly with water. One after another, until the path shone slick and black. Then new prints began appearing, stepping toward me. They stopped a few feet away. For a long second, nothing happened. Then the shape of a man formed out of the fog. Same boots, same vest, same face. He tilted his head, studying me like a reflection trying to remember which side of the glass it belonged on. His mouth opened, and my voice came out. Line complete. I stumbled back, but the earth clutched my boots. The Pulaski slipped from my hand, landing blade first in the dirt between us. He reached down, picked it up, and gave a slow nod. Your turn, he said in my tone, and stepped forward. The fog rolled once, thick as smoke, and I felt myself dragged sideways, like falling into a photo that wouldn't stop developing. My breath caught. For a heartbeat, I saw him, my copy, climb out of the hollow, radio in hand, calling for Kay like nothing had happened. Then the world blinked. When I opened my eyes, sunlight cut through the mist. My clothes were dry, my Pulaski resting on my shoulder. Everything looked normal except for one detail. The ridge above was overgrown, choked with vines decades old. Down in the hollow, a fresh set of prints, his prints now, led uphill toward daylight. Mine pointed the other way, deeper into the mist. I took one step and felt roots coil softly around my ankles, steady, welcoming. The radio on my belt crackled once. Kay's voice, faint and crackly. "Maintenance 2? You reading? Your signal's good again." I keyed the mic, tried to speak, but only static came out. On the ridge above, my other self paused, listening, before walking on. Boots clean, stride perfect. And I stayed below, finishing the line. I'd been meaning to photograph the old Harlan and Sons company store for years. My grandfather used to say, "That place never really closed, it just ran out of customers." The mine shut down in '84, but the ledger supposedly stayed open. The building still stands off River Road, wedged between kudzu and rusted rail. Saturday morning, I parked out front with my camera, notebook, and too much coffee. The roof sagged, and the windows were filmed over like cataracts. But the old lettering, Harlan and Sons Mercantile, still clung to the facade. The front door was padlocked, but the side one gave after a push. The smell hit instantly, molasses, paper, and wet dust. Light cut through broken panes, dust motes swirling like snow. Inside, the air was still. Wooden shelves lined both walls, leaning inward, stacked with relics. Cloudy jars, rusted tins, soap blocks wrapped in brown paper. A brass cash register sat on the counter, drawer cracked open. I took photos as I went, wide shots, detail shots, the usual, dictating notes into my phone. Register intact, floorboards bowed, ledger present. When I checked my screen, I realized something odd. The soap crate I'd just photographed had shifted closer to the aisle. I blinked, looked back. No, definitely closer. Maybe I'd nudged it without noticing. Still, my chest felt heavy, like the air was thick enough to drink. Behind the counter, a ledger lay open. The ink was neat, precise, old-fashioned. I flipped to the last page and froze. The handwriting looked newer, darker. The date read May 13th, 1984, but the red pencil beneath it was bright, too bright. And the last note said, "Credit extended, settle Friday." Then the register clicked. A single, polite sound, like a typewriter key tapping once. I turned. The drawer had slid open another inch. My reflection winked back at me in the dull brass. I stood there trying to decide whether to laugh or leave. The building creaked softly, a slow breath through its boards. The tags on the shelves began to sway, gently brushing each other. Tink, tink, no draft, no wind, just that sound. I took one step toward the door. The aisles seemed narrower than before, angling inward like they were guiding me somewhere. I felt dizzy, suddenly unsure which side I'd entered from. "All right," I said, voice cracking a little. "You've had your fun." The floor answered with a groan that sounded almost like a word. I found the side door again and reached for the handle. My palm left a clean mark in the dust. That's when I heard it. A bell, not a jangle. Not a gust hitting an old wind chime, just one clear, perfect ding, like a cash register completing a sale. I froze, turned. The register drawer had opened halfway. A thin strip of receipt paper unspooled from the top, curling to the floor. The keys gleamed faintly, like someone had just polished them. I took a step closer despite myself. The paper was blank except for a line of faint text at the top, letters printing slowly as I watched. Customer Eli Porter, that's my name. Below it, the register struck again, ding, and a timestamp appeared. 11:45 a.m. My watch read 11:40. The moment I saw my name on that paper, my first thought wasn't ghosts. It was prank. Maybe someone was running a tourist trap. But the air in that room didn't feel like any joke I'd ever been part of. It had weight, like the kind of silence that waits for an answer. I tore the receipt from the roll, folded it once, and stuffed it in my jacket. The paper felt warm, like it had been through a printer seconds ago. The register clicked again, 2 quick sounds, then stopped. I told myself I'd had enough and turned for the exit. Only the door wasn't there anymore. No, it was, but not where it had been. The wall stretched longer, the window above the handle now too high to reach. The room felt rearranged in small, deliberate ways, like a store restocking itself. The aisles behind me looked deeper, darker. I walked fast, flashlight trembling in my hand. The light bounced off shelves that looked too full, cans, jars, boxes, things that hadn't been there when I came in. A can of peaches gleamed under the beam, label new and bright. Beneath it, a stack of flour bags looked freshly delivered. I whispered, "Someone's screwing with me." That's when I noticed the smell, sweet and earthy, like coal dust mixed with sugar. The kind of smell that belongs to people who've been underground too long. The register rang again. Ding. The sound came not from the counter this time, but from deeper inside the store, like another machine had woken up. I followed the sound, against every good instinct I had. Near the back wall, behind a curtain of rotted canvas, a small room waited, maybe the manager's office. Inside sat a second register, older, polished. Its brass gleamed like someone had been shining it every day. And behind it stood shelves of new stock, bright wrappers, glossy labels, fresh produce that smelled alive. The flashlight flickered once. Then the lights above me buzzed faintly to life. Bare bulbs hung from frayed cords. They glowed weakly, painting everything in sepia. The new produce wasn't new anymore. It had turned gray, sagging, dripping onto the floor. The paper goods sagged with mildew. And behind the counter, in the narrow strip of shadow between shelves, I saw movement. Someone, or something, was standing there. The shape was slight, shoulders slumped, hands resting on the brass register, not looking at me, just waiting. I managed a hoarse, "You work here?" The head lifted. No eyes, no mouth, just the faint outline of a face that had forgotten where its features went. The body's edges blurred like smoke held in glass. The register dinged again. I looked down. Another receipt was printing, smooth and slow. Words formed in that neat red type. Items sold, time owed, amount due, 00.0. The drawer opened halfway and a single coin rolled out, landing with a hollow plink. It wasn't new. It wasn't even modern. An old company scrip token stamped with a miner's pick and the words, "Good for trade, Harlan and Sons." I didn't touch it. The figure's hands moved on the counter, sliding that token toward me. The air bent around it, the dust trembling like ripples on a pond. I backed away. The lights flickered again, once, twice, and when they steadied, the figure was gone. Only the register stayed open, and that white paper curl kept printing, page after page, spilling down to the floor. When I finally ran, the aisles were wrong again, too close, too tall. Labels stared at me from both sides, old brands I'd never heard of, all with the same slogan stamped under the logo, "Still taking credit since 1889. I hit the door shoulder first. It gave, and I stumbled into daylight, gasping. The store was silent again. Dust in the window, boards nailed tight. Nothing looked changed, but when I checked my jacket, the folded receipt was gone, replaced by the old brass token, and stamped across it, in letters so fine I almost missed them, were two words: "Account active." I drove home, shaking, token still in my palm. It felt heavier than it should have, the brass warm like it had been in someone's hand for hours. When I set it on the passenger seat, it rolled in a slow circle, stopped, then rolled again, like it didn't want to stay still. By the time I reached town, the sky had gone to slate. I tossed the token onto my kitchen table and tried to convince myself I'd imagined everything. Old buildings do strange things, maybe carbon monoxide or a panic attack. I typed up my notes, but half the photos on my camera were missing. Every file after IMG 241 showed corrupted thumbnails, static gray with faint white streaks running through them, almost like receipts unspooling. I powered the camera off. That's when I noticed the sound. A faint ding coming from somewhere in the apartment. I froze, listening. It came again, soft, polite, like a bell on a counter. I checked my phone, my microwave, even the laptop. Nothing. The sound echoed again from the table. The token was gone. In its place sat a small slip of paper. Crinkled, off-white, faintly smelling of coal dust. I unfolded it with shaking fingers. Customer, E. Porter. Item. Purchased. Property. Amount due, see ledger. My phone buzzed. A notification from my blog. A new comment on my latest post, the one about local mining history. The comment read only, "Credit reissued. Thank you for reopening." I laughed. Couldn't help it. It sounded like air leaking from a tire. I deleted the comment, but the screen stayed smudged with faint letters even after it refreshed, like the words had burned into the pixels. Sleep didn't come that night. Every creak in the walls sounded like a door hinge. Around 2 a.m., I finally checked the clock. Both hands stuck at 12. Then the smell hit, molasses and paper and coal dust, the same scent from the store. I walked to the kitchen and stopped cold. The token was back. This time it sat on top of my camera, pressed into the metal like it had melted there. My notebook lay open beside it, though I hadn't touched it since I got home. A new page was filled in my handwriting, neat and old-fashioned. Inventory. Begins, October 10th. Ledger open. Eli Porter, keeper. My stomach dropped. I tore the page out and ran it underwater. The ink didn't blur. It darkened, bleeding through like veins spreading under skin. The light above the table flickered once, and when it steadied, the walls looked wrong. The paint had yellowed. The refrigerator was gone. In its place stood a wooden shelf stacked with flour sacks. The air hummed, the same low pressure as in the store. I turned toward the door, but it wasn't my apartment door anymore. It was the glass double door of Harlan & Sons Mercantile, clean, bright, freshly painted. Outside the windows, I saw dust motes drifting through daylight. I was inside again. The register on the counter gleamed like a mirror. Beside it sat the old ledger, open to a blank page. The pen lay across it, waiting. I ran. Didn't think. Just sprinted for the door, but every step brought me deeper into aisles that kept multiplying. Shelves stretched upward until I couldn't see the ceiling. Labels turned to faces in the flickering light. Somewhere behind me, the bell chimed. Once, twice, 3 times. When I finally collapsed, gasping, I realized I was standing behind the counter. The pen was in my hand, the ledger open to a fresh page. The words wrote themselves as I watched. Customer, blank, credit approved. The door creaked open, and I heard footsteps entering the store. A voice, friendly, living, called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" The register clicked. The bell rang, and without meaning to, I smiled and said, "Be right with you." That's all for this episode, but the nightmares don't end here. Subscribe for daily horror stories, leave a like if you want more, and let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.